Today, in response to some of the requests I get, I'm going to take a more of a beginner's guide to writing an expert advisor. It's a simple strategy based only on RSI, so probably not the best strategy for trading, but it's a good point to start your programming for expert advisors. I'm going to be taking this all the way from the beginning, using the wizard to create the initial template, through to finishing the expert advisor, and I'll be describing each line of code as I go, why it is the way it is and why I have done this the way I have done. So on screen I have the MetaTrader 4 editor, and this is the beginner's RSI. So I've already created a folder underneath experts called Orchard, because I like to keep all of my work in one place, and it keeps it separate from any of the examples that MetaTrader might release, or if I install any third-party applications, I can install them in their own folder. And under that, again, I've separated this. I've created a folder called Beginner's RSI. So I've already done that. And that's just a simple matter of right-clicking in the navigator and selecting New Folder. And that will create the new folder here, Beginner's RSI. So now I'm going to use the wizard to create the outline for this. So if I just go to New on the ribbon bar, or I can go File, New File, and then the Expert Advisor wizard pops up. It knows that I'm creating an expert advisor because I started underneath the experts folder. So I'll just select next. It's given me the path to where I began because I had already selected beginner's RSI folder before I open this. So it's going to place it in there, and I'm just going to call this also beginner's RSI. It's remembering the author and the link from the last time I used the wizard. So the first time they come through, they'll say meta quotes, but after you change those, they'll remember what you did last time. And I'm not going to use any parameters here. I'll set them all up inside the code. Now here's an option to select which functions I want to be added in by default to the resulting expert advisor. I only need the onInit and onTick functions, and they are there by default. So these are some additional event handlers that I can have. So I'll just select next. I won't select any of these, and finish. And now this has created my initial expert advisor. You can see that it's inserted the onInit and onDinit and onTick by default. Now these are known as event handlers. They are functions, but they're specific types of functions, and they're called event handlers because they react to events that happen inside the terminal. So these are what are called by MetaTrader, and you write your code inside these to react to the things happening inside MetaTrader. onInit is called when you first start up the expert advisor, but it's also called if you shut down MetaTrader and restart while the expert advisor is running, then that expert advisor will restart by default, and it will go through the onInit there. And it will also be called if you open the input box to the expert advisor while it's running and change any of the inputs and click save. Even if you don't change the inputs, if you just click save, it will reinitialize the expert advisor. onDinit is called when the expert advisor shuts down, so when you remove it from the chart, or when you shut down MetaTrader while the expert advisor is running. And onTick is called every time there is a tick event. Now a tick event can be a price change, a trade, all kinds of things can cause that, and this is where you'll do most of the work inside the expert advisor. Now I don't particularly like the format that MetaQuotes sets up when they create these wizards, but I'll leave that for now because it's not really important to what we're doing. I might remove some of the comments as we go through. At the top though, there's a comment block. This is where you would put the name of your MT4 file or your MQ4 file. It's already come with the name and link that I entered in the wizard. And this is also a good place to put a description of the strategy that you're writing inside the expert advisor, because that way you get all of the information you need in one place and you don't need to go out and refer to other documents. Then there are a number of properties created. Copyright, which is the same as the copyright statement from, or is the same as the author statement from the wizard. The link, which is just a link to a website if you have one, and the version number, which is defaulted to 1 in this case. Those appear on the input box to the expert advisor when you open it. So let me quickly compile this. It compiles because I haven't done anything yet and it's all perfectly valid code. If I now go over to MetaTrader 4, you'll see where these appear. So now when I first open up Beginner's RSI, you get this box. I haven't created any inputs yet, so there's no input tab here, but this is the name of the Expert Advisor. This is the version number that's coming from that property statement with the version number. Here's my copyright statement, and if I hover over that, you can see that it's a link and it's pointing to the website that's mentioned in the property link statement. We cancel that and we'll go back to the editor. The next statement, property strict, this was introduced a long time ago, probably around build 600 for MetaTrader. Before that build number of MetaTrader, there were a number of defaults that the language would imply, and they weren't strictly good coding practice. So MetaTrader introduced better practices in the compiler, but to maintain compatibility with code that had already been written, they added this property strict statement. So you can apply this property strict, and I recommend using this always. Next is just a comment that MetaTrader has introduced, and this at the beginning of the code is where I'm going to introduce my input statements. Now, this is a strategy that's based on RSI. So typically I would want to enter the values that are used by the RSI. And there are only two values. There's the number of periods and the closing price, or the applied price. So these are done with an input statement. Naturally, it begins with input, all lowercase, followed by the variable type, and then the name of the variable. Now these input variables are in the global scope. They occur outside any other functions. The global scope means that any variable defined in global scope can be seen inside any other function. It might seem like a convenient way to define variables, but I recommend against it, although you have no choice with inputs. Inputs must be on the global scope. I also typically begin my input variable names with INP. It's a good idea to come up with a naming convention. You don't have to do what I do, but come up with a naming convention, and then you'll know which variables are your input variables. So there's input, and then the data type, the variable name, and then an assignment. And when you first run the Expert Advisor, that's the value that will appear in the input box. So if you did nothing else, you would get these default values. And then the semicolon, of course, just finishes that statement. And then I've added an inline comment. Inline comments begin with the double slash, and then I've just said this is RSI periods. Normally inside code, they're just comments. But if they're on the same line as an input statement, then they replace the name that appears in the input box. I'll give an example of that in a moment, but let me just explain the next line first. It's also an input statement, and here I'm using an enum. So applied price, there is actually an enum. There are a whole series of enums that are already defined in MetaTrader. You can create your own, but this is a predefined enumerator. And it's called enum applied price, as you can see here. The values for this are price close, open, high, low, and several others. The normal use for RSI is to use the closing price, but by having this input statement here, I let the user choose which price they're going to apply to the RSI inside this Expert Advisor. Also, although enums are just integers, and I could have simply said input int here, by naming this as an enum, when you run the Expert Advisor and get the input box, this will show as a drop down that shows the options to choose, where if I simply define it as an integer, the end user will be free to put any number they like, which may not be a valid applied price. Now, to show the things I was mentioning, I'm going to remove that comment initially, and this will still compile. I haven't done anything to it yet, and I'll compile that. And now we'll go back to MetaTrader 4, and I'll just run the input again, and you'll see what this does. So now, the newly compiled Beginner's RSI, it now has the Inputs tab. If I go there, you can see the RSI applied price. This is the comment that I put on the RSI applied price line. And if I go into close price, you can see I have that drop down showing the options for an applied price. RSI periods, I've removed the comment from that line now. And all I'm getting is the variable name here, which is not very user friendly. That's why I always add a comment at the end of those input statements, and I can get this more useful name showing in the input box. Let's go back to the code, and I'll put my comment back on this line. So those two inputs define the calculation for the RSI. This particular strategy involves the RSI crossing overbought and oversold levels, And different people have different definitions for what they are. So it makes some sense to ask the end user what they consider to be the overbought and the oversold levels. So again, 2 more inputs for that. And these are doubles. Although people typically think of the levels as integers, 0 to 100, they are actually doubles, and it's possible to have 75.3. So I'm going to define the inputs as doubles, and I'm simply calling those the input oversold level, which I'm defining as 20, and the input overbought level, which I define as 80. And the comments at the end of these lines again will appear in the input. So the statements are always the same, input double. The other thing to mention about input statements, while these variables exist on the global scope, they can't be changed. There's a special factor of the input variables that they cannot be modified. In earlier versions of MT4, you may have seen a statement called extern here, which does the same thing in terms of the input. It will still appear in the input box and capture data, and they still appear on the global scope, but the extern variables can be modified inside your code. I prefer the use of input. I can't find any need to modify the actual input variables. If it's something that I may want to change while the code is running, then I'll simply copy that input variable to a working variable and change the working variable. Now next in this code, I'm going to exit the trades simply by a take profit and stop loss number. So let me enter those. It's a very simple take profit and stop loss. Input, these are doubles. Input take profit, and I'm defaulting that to 0.01. If this were going to be trading yen, then you would want to change these numbers in the input. For most currencies though, 0.01 is 100 pips. And the same here for the stop loss. I'm defaulting them both to 100 pips. And now there are some standard inputs that I have in almost every Expert Advisor. The order size, because when you place trades, they have to be of a particular size, and it's good to let the end user decide how big that's going to be. You may have some algorithm that's based on your equity, and you may want to calculate these, but for most cases, I'm going to enter a fixed size here. And I typically begin at 0.01 because you don't want mistakes to happen where you're accidentally trading large numbers simply because you forgot to change this. It's much safer to accidentally trade small lot sizes rather than trade a large lot size. And a trade comment, I'm going to be attaching a comment to every trade that's created, and these will appear in the trade history window. So it's good to, again, to let the user set this, but I typically default it to something that describes the Expert Advisor. And then finally, a magic number. This particular Expert Advisor doesn't need the magic number. It is attached to every trade when it's created. By default, if you enter trades at the terminal from the keyboard, they will have a magic number of 0. And that's a good way to identify trades entered manually compared to trades entered by an Expert Advisor, because there is no way to set the magic number if you're simply creating the trade with a buy or sell yourself. The normal use for magic number might be where you have more than one Expert Advisor running on your account, and that way the Expert Advisors can identify the trades that belong to those experts simply by finding the matching magic number. And while some code or some Expert Advisors you find in the market don't allow you to enter that magic number, I like to give you an option for that just in case I run into a magic number that's used by someone else. So you can modify this number to make sure that it's unique. So next we're down to the on init section, and this is called once at the beginning of running the Expert Advisor and every time it's reinitialized, which could be for reasons of even changing the inputs. So if you decide while this is running that you want to change the order size to 0.02, you can open up the input box for the Expert Advisor while it's running. You can change that value, but it will go back through the on init statement. For this strategy, we don't need to worry too much if that's going to happen, because all of these trades are set and forget type trades. Once they're placed, the take profit and stop loss will take care of closing them out, and this Expert Advisor doesn't keep track of them, which is again why the magic number here wasn't so important. But just in case you have an Expert Advisor that's keeping track of things, it's good to know that this on init is going to be called again every time you restart or change any of the inputs. I'm just going to tidy this up a little bit before I put some code in. All right, the first thing I'm doing here, I'm defining a variable called result, and that's an enum init ret code. You can see that at the end of the on init there is this return init succeeded that's been put there by the wizard. That return value must be one of the values that are valid for enum init ret code. and I'm just initializing a variable to init succeeded. I like to do this because then as I do more and more things inside the onInit, it gives me an opportunity to set that return code rather than just have a hard-coded value coming back here. I don't have a lot to do in this Expert Advisor. In fact, I really have very little to do at all. I'm going to manufacture something for the sake of demonstration. So I'm going to call a function called check input, where I'm going to validate that the inputs were sensible in this case. Being based simply on RSI, there's not much to check. I know that the applied price must be a valid applied price because I've used the drop down to limit that. So I don't need to check that, but I suppose I want to make sure that the number of periods is valid. So I've set up a function here called check input, and that returns a value of type enum init retcode, which I then assign back to this result. And then I'm just saying if the result is not equal to succeeded, then I'm just going to return the result. So if this fails, then I'll just return immediately and return that value. And in a more complex Expert Advisor, there may be more code following this. So I will typically, as soon as I get a result that is not success, I will just exit the onInit at that point. And this will cause the expert to not run at all. So if you've entered some invalid value, then the expert will simply stop running at this point. There'll be an error message in the log. I'm going to jump down now and show this check input function. So I'm going to be doing this through the demonstration where I jump out and show you the functions that I'm calling. So now down at the bottom of the code, here is the check input function. It's of type enum init retcode. So when you write a function, the first statement in the function, or the first keyword in the function, is the data type that's being returned. I'm going to return a data type of enum init retcode. You could return an integer, double, string, any variable type that's defined, or if you don't need to return anything at all, that can say void, V-O-I-D. So in this case, I'm going to return the retcode, which is how I'm able to determine whether this was successful and then exit the onInit if it fails. The next part of the function statement is the name of the function, check input, followed by parentheses and any variables that I'm passing to the function. I don't have anything to pass to this function because it's going to be reading directly from those global variables in the inputs, but you'll see some functions later where I do pass values in. And this is really just to show how to use this function. So I don't have much to do here. I'm simply saying if the input RSI periods, now remembering input statements are on the global scope, so inside here I can see those input statements even though they haven't been passed into the function. Typically variables defined inside a code block are only visible inside that code block, and a code block is anything delimited by these brackets. So if the RSI periods are less than or equal to 0, then I'm going to return parameters incorrect, and that's one of the values of this enum init retcode. And really I have nothing else to check here, so then I'm just returning initialization succeeded. Okay, so let's go back up to the onInit. And that's really all I have in this onInit. Let me just put another line there. There's nothing in this example. It's a very simple Expert Advisor. Now let's move on. On dinit, I have nothing to do here on dinit. With nothing to do, I could either delete this function completely, or I can just leave it there because it's already doing nothing. I'll just leave it for the time being. So now we're down to onTick, and this is where most of the work happens inside the Expert Advisor. I'll tidy this up again. All right, just removing some comments and shaping it the way I like to see it. So onTick is the event handler that's called for any price event. So if the price moves up, down, even sideways, as long as there's been a trade, you'll get an onTick. And this is how you detect things happening in the market. Typically, that's when you would want to perform your trades. For this particular strategy, I need to know if the RSI has moved into the overbought or the oversold region. Not just if it's there now, but if it has been there at some point. So I need to create two variables to hold those flags. So here are my two variables. They're both of type Boolean, and one I'm just calling oversold and overbought. I've included this static statement. As I said, variables exist and they have a lifetime inside code blocks, and this is the delimiter for the code block. Without that static statement, every time this function started again, so every time there's an event and the onTick is called, all of the variables defined in here get initialized again. But by using this static statement, these variables will, the first time this is called, be set up with this initialization value of false, but each time this function is called after that, they will still have the value they had the last time the function was called. I want these to have a lifetime more than just the one function, because I need to know if on a previous tick this was oversold or overbought, and maybe it isn't now, so I need to know what it was, and you'll see how that logic works a little later. So I'm using these static variables. Some people will put these on the global scope, because the global scope also exists outside the lifetime of this one function. But I prefer to keep things as tightly scoped as possible. So I'm using the static statement to make sure that I can maintain the value of those two variables, but without putting them into the global scope. The next thing I want to do is trade only when a new bar has been created. So let me explain that. When you look at the MetaTrader 4 chart, let me call it up again. When you look at the MetaTrader 4 chart, this bar is bar number 0, the bar to the right of the screen, and that bar is currently in progress. We haven't finished trading in that bar. This is a 4-hour chart that I'm looking at. So every 4 hours that bar will close and a new bar will open up, and the new bar will be called bar number 0. I only want to trade when a new bar is created, because I'm looking at the value based on the closing price. Closing price while a bar is still open is actually the current price, because you never know when the bar is going to close, or you never know if the price is going to move on from that. That means that while, say, a 4-hour bar is open, that price can go up and down, could go anywhere, and the value of the RSI in this case that's being calculated on that will keep fluctuating. I don't want to trade based on where the RSI value is in the middle of that bar, because by the end of the bar it may be somewhere completely different. So if I'm looking for an overbought, it's possible for the RSI to go into overbought, but then before the bar closes, the price drops again and the RSI comes out of overbought. So I don't want to react to bar number 0. I'm only reacting to the bar that's just closed. And because the bar on the far right is bar number 0, the next bar that's just closed is bar number 1, and the bar to the left of that is 2 and 3 and so on, counting to the left. So I'm only going to look at bar number 1, but I don't want to look at it every tick. There could be thousands of ticks happening while bar number 0 is open. I only want to look at it on the first tick, because after that nothing else is going to change for that bar. It's already closed. So I have a function that I use to detect if I've just opened a new bar. So I'm trying to look for the very first tick that's happening in bar number 0, and then I will look at the data from bar number 1. So back here in the code, I'm calling a function called new bar, and I'm saying if not new bar, so new bar is a Boolean, and we'll look at that in a moment. New bar returns a Boolean value telling me if I've just opened a new bar. And if I have not just opened a new bar, this exclamation mark is the not statement. So new bar returns a Boolean, and it's a function that has no arguments because it's simply looking at the current bars on the chart. I don't need to pass any values into it. The exclamation mark is the not operator. So I'm saying if not a new bar, then it must be an existing bar, which means we're just in the middle of bar number 0. Then I'm just going to return. Nothing more to do. And that will just keep cycling through the on tick until the next time I create a new bar. So let's look at the new bar function now. Okay, I've just scrolled down to the bottom of the code again and added the new bar function. And it simply returns true or false if the bar has changed. So defining the function type as a Boolean. Remember the check input had a different return type. So I'm defining it as a Boolean. It's called new bar, has no arguments. First thing I'm doing is declaring a date time variable, which I'm calling current time. And to get the value for that, I'm calling this iTime function. iTime is an inbuilt function in MetaTrader, and the arguments to that are the symbol. Now symbol, uppercase S, symbol with empty arguments to it, that will return the symbol from the current chart where your expert is running. And in most cases, that's the symbol that you're going to be using. So I can just call this with symbol. Period, same thing, is the current time frame of that chart. So I've got a 4-hour chart open. This will return the period for a 4-hour. And 0 is the bar number that I want to get the time for. So what this function will do is return the time that that bar number for that symbol and time frame opened. And because this is the symbol on chart and the period on chart, I'm actually getting the time that bar number 0 on my chart opened. The next thing I'm doing is declaring another date time variable, which is the prior time. And I'm calling this static because I want to remember the last current time that I had. So this is the prior time, the last time we went through this function. But the first time I go through the function, it has no value. It must be initialized. I'm just initializing that to whatever the current time is. And then all I need to do to check to see if a new bar is opened is to check if the prior time matches the current time. And I'm doing that here. My result is current time is not equal to prior time. Now, the first time we come into this function, we've just started the Expert Advisor. We come in here. I will calculate current time based on the time of bar number 0. I'll initialize prior time to be the same as current time. So when I open it, the current bar, these two are going to be the same. And that means that result is going to come back as false because current time is equal to prior time. And that means I don't have a new bar then. And I'm going to be calling new bar every tick. As soon as a new bar has opened, this current time is going to get a different value from this iTime function. Prior time will have remembered what it was last time we came through here, and it won't be initialized a second time. This initialization statement, remember, happens only the first time it's called, because this static statement will hold the value that it had before. So prior time will have the value that is now applicable to bar number 1, and current time has the time for bar number 0, and so this result will return a true because current time is not the same as prior time. And then all I do here, I just say that prior time is equal to current time, so I save what the current time is, and then next time we come through here, they'll be the same again, and this will return false until I get a new bar created, and then just return that result. Okay, let's go back to the onTick function. Now the next thing I need to do in this, it's a simple RSI expert, as I said, simple RSI strategy. So I need to get the value for that RSI. And here's the statement. I'm declaring a variable of type double to hold the RSI value, double RSI. This is not static. I don't need it to be static. I can recalculate this each time. In fact, I should recalculate it each time. Then I'm calling the iRSI. This is an inbuilt function in MetaTrader to calculate RSI. It has similar arguments. There's the symbol, which is from the current chart here, and the time frame from the current chart. And then the two inputs that I had, the RSI periods and the RSI applied price. And then which bar number do I want that RSI for? Remember, I don't want the RSI for bar number 0. I want it for bar number 1 because once I've created a new bar, that won't change. So this just gives that RSI value back. It's the same value that you'll get in the RSI indicator. Another key part of this strategy is that I won't trade unless the bar that just closed moved in the direction that I'm going to trade. So if I've detected I've been overbought, which means that I want to be selling, I won't sell until I have a downward candle. And if I've detected that I'm oversold, which means I want to buy, I won't buy until I have an upward candle. So we get the direction of the last bar. So bar number 1 again. I'm declaring a value of type double, calling it direction. And for this, I'm getting iClose, which is another inbuilt function that gets me the close price of a bar based on the current chart symbol and the current chart period, bar number 1. So the close price for bar number 1 minus iOpen is another function, returns the open price for that bar. So minus the open price for symbol, period, and bar number 1. So that's going to give me a positive or negative number. If it's an upward bar, then close is going to be higher than open, so I'll get a positive number. And if it's a downward bar, then close is going to be less than open, so I will get a negative number, which is a fairly simple way of knowing direction. It's either positive or negative. Now, the other thing I want to do is guard against a situation where the RSI may drift backwards from overbought or oversold and cross the midpoint without ever trading. Because once it crosses the midpoint, I consider that having been in overbought or oversold becomes an invalid flag. It's a very unlikely situation, but it can happen in extreme market movements. So I'll do a simple check here. If the RSI has crossed the midpoint, then I'm going to clear any flags. So if it's now greater than 50, remember oversold means the RSI was too low. So if it goes over 50, then I'll just clear the oversold flag. Equally, if it goes below 50, I'm going to clear the overbought flag. So it's a very simple statement. I've already calculated the RSI value above. If that's greater than 50, meaning the RSI is on the way up, or it is already up, then oversold becomes false. And the same thing if it goes down, overbought becomes false. They may already be false, but there's no point in worrying about that. It's just as easy to set the values again as it is to worry about whether they are already set. Remember, I'm only doing this once per bar. I'm not putting a lot of load on the computer by processing this every tick. So if I'm running this even on a 1 minute chart, to do this calculation once a minute is not too much strain for a computer. So now with all that out of the way, I want to know if I should be setting the oversold or the overbought flags. I'm saying here, if the RSI is above, or if the RSI is greater than the overbought level that we input, and by default my overbought level is 80. So if the RSI is above 80, then I'm just setting that overbought flag to true. And if the RSI is less than the oversold level, I'm setting the oversold to true. Now, as I'm saying in the comment here, it's scrolled off the chart. Let me just... If I had simply written this statement as if I had simply written the statement like that, I would still get a true value if the RSI is greater than the overbought level. But I actually want to remember that even after the RSI has drifted below. I want to know that it has been in the overbought level and that it's come out again. Where this statement would reset overbought to false as soon as RSI went down to 79, when I actually want it to stay true. Once it's gone above 80, I want it to stay true until it gets one of my reset statements that I've already written. So that's why I've used the if statement to set this to true, and the same with the oversold. So now down to the actual trading logic. If the flag's been set and the bar has moved in the right direction, so if I've got the overbought flag set and the bar has moved down, then I'm going to make a trade. I've written the trading rules here in the comments. I'm going to buy if oversold is true. So if I've set this to true, even if it was set to true the last bar or the bar before that, as long as it's still true. And if the RSI is now greater than the old oversold level, so I don't want to be buying while the RSI is still oversold. I want to wait until it comes out of that region. And the same for overbought. I don't want to be selling while it's still overbought. I want to wait until it comes out of that region and starts to weaken. And in the case of a buy, if the last bar was an upward bar. And sell is just the opposite. Overbought is true. The RSI is now lower than overbought, so it's no longer overbought. And the last bar was a down bar. So first I create a variable to hold the ticket number that I'm going to get back from a trade. And that's because when you open an order, you get a ticket number back. And if opening the order fails, the ticket number is going to be 0. So I have no checks in this Expert Advisor for that, but it's a good idea to test the ticket numbers that come back to make sure that your trades have worked. So my conditions are, if the oversold flag has been set, and this double ampersand is the and statement in an if condition, and then I like to put new conditions inside parentheses. This is just a simple variable that's a Boolean, but any additional conditions that require some kind of comparison, and this one has the greater than comparison, I like to put them inside parentheses because it helps to identify where they begin and end. This is a very simple statement, probably not a problem, but if you start to write more complex conditional statements, it's good to know where these begin and end. So if the RSI value is greater than the oversold level, so it was oversold and now it's come out of the oversold, and the direction is greater than 0, so we've just had an upward bar at bar number 1. But then I'm going to open a buy trade. If that's not true, then we'll go to this else, which has another if statement looking to see if the opposite is true. If it is or was overbought, it is no longer overbought, so the RSI is less than the overbought level, and the direction is negative. So I'm either buying or selling or doing nothing if the conditions aren't met. So if I'm buying, then my ticket, I call this order open function. This is another function we'll jump down to in a moment. I'm saying that I want to buy, and I'm passing in the stop loss and the take profit values that we got from the input. And after I've done that, I'm going to set the oversold to false. That prevents me from trading again and again and again. So as soon as I've made a trade, I simply turn off the flag, and then this statement won't be true the next time through. Where if I hadn't set that, it's possible for this statement to be true every time it comes through this loop. So let's go down now and look at the order open function. Now here's the order open function. It says simple function. It looks like there's a lot here, but it breaks down quite simply. As with every function, I'm defining the return type, and this is an integer because it's going to be returning the ticket number that's assigned, and those are integers. The name of the function, and then the arguments to it. Each argument begins with the data type for the argument. So the first one is the enum order type, which is order type buy or order type sell. And then the name of the variable that I'm assigning that to. And then I have the double for the stop loss and a double for the take profit. Now remember, these came from the inputs. They're not actual prices. These are 0.01 each by default. So I'm going to need at some point to calculate what the price should be for those, because when you place an order, you don't place the stop loss and the take profit as a distance away from the price, you place them as fixed prices. And that's one of the reasons I have a function to do this rather than do it inside the main line of the code. And just while I'm here, a little tip. When I make these videos, I expand the font so that they're easy enough to see on screen. Let me take this back to where it would normally be. That's better. A tip is, and this is the size of the font that I would normally see. It might be a little bit small for you to read on screen now. I'll bring it back in a moment. When you write a function, it should fit on one screen. That's a rule of thumb. And it's because that makes it much easier for you to just look at the screen and see what's happening in that function. If the function scrolls over many screens, then it makes it very hard for you to read this in a maintenance mode and see what's going on. Now I break that rule in the demonstrations because I have such a large font. It's very hard to do that with such a large font. But when you're writing your own code, and this is the default font that the editor is set up with, try to make sure that you can see an entire function on screen. It's not always possible, but if you can, this is what you should be doing, because I can look at this in one screen and see what's happening. So I'm declaring some variables. Variable called ticket of type integer. This is where I'm going to capture the ticket number that comes back from the function. The open price, because I haven't passed a price into this. This function that I've included in the Expert Advisor executes trades at market price. So I need to calculate market price, because when you try to send an order to MetaTrader, it wants to know the price where you would like that to execute. So I'm going to calculate my open price. I've also got here take profit or stop loss price and take profit price, so that I can calculate actual prices that match these stop loss and take profit arguments that are distances away from the price. And as the comment says, first thing, calculate the open price, take profit and stop loss prices based on the order type. So if the order type is equal to double equal sign, remember this, it's very easy to make a mistake and put a single equal sign and your code will look all right, but it won't work. So double equal sign when you're doing a comparison. First I'm calculating the open price. I'm using the normalized double function because prices should be made to fit the format that MetaTrader wants to execute a price. Normalized double just helps to make sure that they are the right size in terms of number of decimals for a price that MetaTrader likes. It should be anyway, because I'm calling an inbuilt pricing function from MetaTrader, but it's not a bad idea to include this whenever you calculate a price. Symbol info double will get me information about the current symbol, or the symbol supplied in the argument, and I'm supplying here the chart symbol, and it will get me a double value. And there is another enumerator that I can pass to that to tell it what I want. So in this case, I want the ask price. there's a symbol bid, which we'll see down here. So I'm asking for the ask price for the current chart symbol, and then normalized double wants a number of digits to round that to, and there's a digits function that will tell me the number of digits for the current chart symbol as well. Now, just ignore this comment for a moment. I'm calculating the stop loss price. I'm saying if the stop loss passed into the function is 0, then the stop loss price is 0. When I send an order to MetaTrader, if I give it a stop loss price or a take profit price of 0, then they become ignored. So if I've said the stop loss gap, which is the value passed in, is 0, then the stop loss price is also 0. If not, then again the normalized double function, and I'm using the open price just calculated minus that stop loss. So this is for a buy. So my stop loss 0.01 will mean that I'm calculating the stop loss price at 0.01 below the current open price, and using the digits function again for the normalized double. And the take profit price is the same thing. Same comparison. If take profit is equal to 0, then the take profit price is going to be 0. Otherwise, and the only difference here from the stop loss, this is a plus sign, and I'm using the take profit value to set the difference. So this will be a price plus 0.01. Now the comment that I have, I'm using a ternary operator here. I could say if stop loss is equal to 0, stop loss price is equal to 0, else stop loss price equals normalized double, and so on. The ternary operator is just a little bit more succinct and sometimes easier to read. And it works like this. Here's a condition. This is the same condition you would put into an if statement. So I could say if brackets stop loss is equal to 0. But then I follow that with a question mark. So this is the thing that initiates the ternary operator and says I'm checking a condition. And if that condition is true, then it doesn't execute any statements other than to return a value. So this is what a ternary does. It returns a value, and here's the value that it returns, 0. So I'm saying if stop loss is equal to 0, then return a 0, which gets assigned to stop loss price. And the next thing after that true section of the ternary operator is a colon, and then the value that I return in the false section. And I just find many times it's much easier to read this than it is to have an if statement that goes over several lines, or even if I compound it onto one line. This is just a little bit easier to read at times. But you could just as easily have written the code as it says here in the comment. If stop loss is equal to 0, stop loss price equals 0, else stop loss price equals always double. Those statements are equivalent. That was for an order type buy, where the take profit is above the price and stop loss is below the price. If it's an order type sell, there are really only 3 small differences. Firstly, the open price, I'm getting the bid price. So when you open a trade, buy opens at the ask price and sell opens at the bid price. And the other 2 changes are simply reversing these signs. So stop loss is the open price plus the stop loss value, and take profit price is open price minus the take profit. And just in case you called this with something else, this function is only intended to handle buy and sell. So if you accidentally called it with something else, then I'm going to return a -1, which is effectively an invalid ticket number. So if you're doing error checking, then in the rest of your code, you'll say this trade failed. Assuming we get past that, so this is a guard clause because it will simply return out of the function without going to the end and returning the value. So this guard clause would have terminated the function already. Assuming we get through here, then I'm calling the order send. That's an inbuilt function in MetaTrader. And the arguments to that are the symbol. So I'm still using the chart symbol. The action that I want to take, and the order type I've passed in is either an order type buy or order type sell. The order size, and this is coming from my global variable, and the input's the order size. So that's how many lots I want to buy or sell. The open price that was just calculated. Slippage. I'm going to allow for any slippage here, so I'm setting that to 0. If you want to prevent some cases where there might be a very fast market movement and after you attempt to place an order, the price may move too far against you, you can set a slippage value here that will prevent that trade from opening if the price has moved too far away from this open price. Remember, you're sending requests to make trades and the broker is then executing those in the market. And if there's a lot of activity at the time, you go on the end of a queue. And if you don't get to execute your order until the price has moved, then you may not get it at the price you expect. Usually these small trades, if you're in retail trading, they're very small. Usually they get executed very quickly. But if you're worried about that, then you can set the slippage factor to prevent the price moving too far away from where you are now. And then the stop loss price, the take profit price, the trade comment that I set in the inputs, and the magic number. There is an optional argument here for expiry. It is meaningless for a buy and sell. It's for buy stop, buy limit, and sell limit trades, where they are conditional trades and you can set an expiry on them so they disappear from the market if they haven't been executed by the time the expiry happens. But because these are all market trades, that is an irrelevant argument and I'm just ignoring it here in the call. And this is the point where if you wanted to, you would check that ticket number and maybe handle it in case there's an error, and then you could call up the error number and see what's gone wrong. I'm not doing that. I'm just ignoring it at the moment. So I'm just returning that ticket number. So this will either succeed or fail. If it succeeds, I'll have a valid ticket number greater than 0. If it fails, I'll have a return value of 0 or something lower. So now we can go back into the on-tick function. And in the on-tick function, so I'm either going to be buying or selling or doing nothing. This is the point where you may want to check the ticket number that came back. And if that ticket number was a 0, then it would mean that these orders have failed. So you might check it in here. Because after I've attempted to open an order for this ticket, I'm simply setting oversold to false. If that failed for some reason, like maybe there was a network error, you may want to not reset this value so that the next tick you can loop around and try again. There's a complexity in doing that I'm not going to cover here. I'm just going to assume that these trades work, and if they don't work, then we're just going to forget about it and wait till the next time there's a trigger. And then that's all we need in the on-tick function. I'm just going to return. And this is a point to mention, you'll see there are no arguments in this return. That's because this particular function is void. If a function is defined as void, you cannot have an argument in the return. And if it's not declared as void, you must have an argument. The compiler will complain to you if you do anything else. So this is just return semicolon, and that ends this function. Now let me compile that and make sure I haven't missed anything. And that's everything. So I've taken you now step by step through writing the entire Expert Advisor. I'm not saying the strategy in here is a good strategy. It's just a strategy and you may want to build on it. The points to note are getting the values from the marketplace. So you're getting the RSI value in this case, or any other value you want to use in a function. I'm getting actual price action movements by getting the direction of a candle. I'm maintaining a flag, so this is good in strategies where you do set a flag. Some strategies simply work off the price of the candle that's just closed. Some actually use a flag. This one uses a flag. And then I'm executing a trade. And that's everything. I will just quickly run this in the demonstration, or in the strategy tester, so you can see it run. I have run it previously and it's not a very successful strategy, so let me just warn you against using this as it stands. But you can always tweak the inputs to this and see if you can get a better strategy, and perhaps on a different currency in a different set of times it will work better. But that is the complete end-to-end Expert Advisor for the simple RSI strategy. Alright, I've got the strategy tester running using the default values. It does take a little while before the RSI crosses the 80 or the 20, so I'll speed this through a little bit to get to that point. Didn't catch it quite in time, it's actually happened twice. You can see here on the chart that the RSI went above the overbought line, and it's actually done it a second time before I managed to stop, just crossed again here. So what happened, we crossed that overbought at this point, and then the RSI came out from overbought in this candle, and it was also a downward candle. So at the beginning of the next, at the point where this would have been candle number 0, all the conditions were met. The RSI had been in the overbought range, it had exited the overbought range here, and the previous candle was a downward candle. So at the opening of that bar, we executed a sell trade. And if you can see closely enough, there are actually 2 sells here, and that's because at the very next candle, it moved back into overbought range, and then came out again with a downward candle. So we've executed a second sell here at the beginning of this candle. So it's doing exactly as I expected. Maybe not a great strategy. You probably don't want that to happen, but you can always modify the Expert Advisor to meet new rules if you like. So that's everything on this particular strategy and how to write this Expert Advisor from beginning to end. I hope this has been useful to you. If it has, please click thumbs up, give us a like. And if you want to see more videos like this, remember to click the subscribe button. And if you click the bell icon, then you'll be notified when we do release the next video. So until the next time, thank you for watching.